Well, our next guest is one of the greats of the game. 133 test matches, 170 one-day internationals, 15 test centuries, captained his country as well. And if you look at some of the big moments, there are a lot of big moments in Shane Warne's career, but when Shane Warne took his hat-trick, Alec Stewart was at the other end, bravely battling on with a broken thumb, I believe. He was obviously in the change rooms for the Gadding ball. There's the incident where Shane Warne went down to Silence Bay 13. Alec was captain of England at the time, and when things got nice and rowdy. And he's been there for the majority of those Ashes series, with the exception of the last two that Shane Warne played. Alec, it's a pleasure to speak to you. It always is, and thanks for joining us.
No, pleasure to be with you, but obviously very sad circumstances. But now, as you say, Warne, I played against him a lot. He got me out a lot. I can call him a cricketing mate and someone I had massive respect for. It's just very, very sad news, and obviously with the loss of Rod Marsh as well. I've said all along, it's not just Australian cricket that are going to miss these two greats, but the game of cricket is going to miss these two wonderful people.
When we bring up Shane Warne and you hear his name, is there a memory that immediately comes straight to your head? Is there one place you go to, whether it's one battle, one game, one moment?
Probably the flipper he did me with first time I played against him in Brisbane. Remember that 3-4, I think the tour was. We'd played against, or not played against him. He'd bowled us to us in the nets on my first Ashes trip in 1991. He was probably at the academy then in Adelaide, and he bowled leg spin out the back there in the nets to us as a net bowler effectively. But already people were telling us, watch out for this fella. He spins it big. He's a prospect. And then, say, a couple of years later, I've cut him for 4. Next ball, I went to pull him for 4. Everyone thought I was going to cut it. I actually went to pull him. And it's one of the few times I've been done for pace. But to be done for pace by a leg spin is pretty ordinary. But thankfully, he went on to get 700 plus wickets, which I think I succumbed, was it 14 times? But if you ask me one moment, it would be that time. You know, I hadn't seen a flipper before, as I proved in the way I tried to play it.
So obviously the big highlight he has is the first ball to Mike Gadding, and obviously I'm assuming you were sitting back watching, and is it the sort of thing you go, you sort of, as you say, you knew him beforehand a little bit. Did it kind of surprise you at all? Because obviously it surprised Mike, but is it the sort of thing you go, that it's not surprising, that's what sort of came out the first ball he bowled that day?
Yeah, listen, it's at the time it was, well, I think, I'll have to check, but I think I walked out the bat after Gap was out. I think, I could be wrong, but if I didn't follow Gap in, then I was the next wicket down after that, I believe. But no, the more you see it, the more you think, geez, how would you play that? Even if you knew that ball, how that ball was going to behave, you knew that, it'd be interesting to see how you'd still try and play it. Because the amount of drift he got, it started probably on the line of middle, then it's drifted to a foot outside leg, and then it's knocked the off bail off. Watching Heels, who'd kept to him before, Ian Healy, he didn't know he was going to do as much as that either. But it's just, listen, it was the making of him. You know, I watched the Amazon Prime documentary, or whatever you wish to call it, on Shane, and watching and listening to him, you know, he was a wizard. You know, that is the thing. When people say to me, who was the best cricketer I played against, and I've always said it, I said Brian Lara and Shane Warne, because they were both geniuses, you know, one with the bat, one with the ball, but they won games single-handedly, near enough for their team, and they had that, you know, we will never lose. Whatever the situation, if I'm in the team, I will ensure that my team gets over the line. And he instilled that. Obviously, he played in a fantastic Australian side. But again, listening to the tributes since, you know, his fellow Australians have all said similar, that he would not give in until it was all over.
But for various reasons, he obviously never got the chance to captain Australia at test level, but he did briefly captain the one-day side when Steve Waugh was out, and I believe it was against you and Sri Lanka during that tour. I guess, what was he like as a captain, and do you feel that he would have been a very good test captain?
Yeah, again, you know, without wishing to repeat what other people have said, but, you know, I've always said he would have been a brilliant Test match captain, but for his, we can use the word, alleged off-field activities that perhaps Cricket Australia were frightened of. But he was ahead of the game. He almost was 2 overs ahead of the game. He'd never played catch-up. I captained that triangular series, and there were times he had 3 and 4 slips in for the new ball. Well, in white ball cricket, if you had 2 slips, you were probably attacking. He had 4. And he just said, no, let's get early wickets. We're going to bowl you out. Yep, it's white ball cricket, but if we can take 10 wickets pretty quick, I reckon we'll win the game. But he always took the positive outlook. That was the thing, the attacking option. And again, you listen to others who have played under him or been in and around the environment, whether he's been as a coach or a mentor or whatever, and it's always take the positive option, which is what I love anyway. But he could back it up as well with his own ability and also the quality of that Australian side he did captain or play in.
Yeah, obviously an Ashes tour goes on for a couple of months and then quite often would lead into a one-day series or something on afterwards. So you could be in Australia for 3, even leading up to 4 months at a time. So your paths would have crossed quite often. You'd be either at a hotel or on the ground before the matches or just training or whatever. Was there any stage where Warnie had a footy and asked you to, or called for the lead to hit you on the chest on the way past or something like that? He was quite well known bringing the footies with him.
Yeah, no, he did. I think sort of going in the gym and doing perhaps what strength conditioning coaches weren't perhaps high on his agenda or a list to do. But no, if there was, as you say, a footy about, an Aussie rules ball about, you'd see the lads, the Australians play. And yeah, he was at the forefront of that, where he'd say bouncing a ball, kicking it, taking a mark or whatever. And then talking to him, because, so I'm a big football fan, as in English football, soccer. But he was too, he followed it. But he's always said to me that there's no better game than Aussie rules. And I've only seen 2 games live. I spent a lot of time in Perth as a youngster playing grade cricket, and I got to see West Coast Eagles play twice. And we used to show it on TV here, but it's a harder game for me to follow on TV than it was live. But no, I love the game and think it's a highly skilled, good game. But he obviously, and like I said, for me, if I was going to be professional cricketer or professional footballer, I wanted to be a professional footballer. And Warnie was the same. Given a chance of being an AFL player or an Australian cricketer, I believe I'm right in saying that he'd rather have played AFL.
What was that relationship? I mean, it feels like cricket back then, you were more likely to be friends. There'd be those beers after matches. It feels like maybe now in the ultra professionalism, it's like, no, go to the gym for an hour and a half after a game and do your laps and do all of that sort of stuff. Whereas you guys might have had a bit more time to bond. Was that sort of the case?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the game's obviously changed and moved forward. A lot of these guys now that play with and against each other play in franchise cricket. So the unknowns almost have gone. Whereas when we first started playing, you would go in perhaps at the end of a day's play during a test match. The batting side would go in the fielding side. Then that turned into at the end of a test match. Then it turned into the end of a series. It was almost as though, no, we don't want the opposition to get to know us. Whereas ours completely the other way. And because Australia at the time were, the lead side in the world, I'm saying to our players, look, get to know them. They are only human beings. Yeah, they're good. But if you break down that almost aura that perhaps they carried as a team, and you got to know the individuals and actually understood that, they're not always 10 out of 10 cricketers, or they don't always get 100 or a 5. But break it down, because I think that would give us an advantage. Instead of holding them up on a pedestal, you still respect them, but actually get to know them. And that was what I tried to do. Warnie being one of them, because he's very generous with his time. Obviously, I'm older than Warnie, but it was good just to talk and break down. Yeah, world class, best leg spinner ever, but also he's a good bloke. That was the thing. Once you understood he was a good bloke on the field, yeah, all bets are off. You're at war, but then off it, you're allowed to be mates.
Yeah, I was about to go into that bit. You talk getting to know the opposition and to knowing well off the field, but then getting onto the field. Is there any little exchanges that you can remember where either you're keeping and he was batting or he was bowling to you, or any little comment that you sort of go, just sticks in your mind and go, oh, yep, that was what it was like between us?
He wasn't shy of a word, but I guess I wasn't either. But because he always had the better of us throughout when I played 7 Ashes series, of which he'd have played in 6 of them. But yeah, he'd climb into or test out the new players, and if I was at the non-strikers end, then I'd obviously try and protect that debutant or a younger player by suggesting Warne concentrate on your bowling, mate. You can talk to him after, off the field. But then, that's just general sort of banter and that. But he played it tough, but he was good. He would try and get into people's heads. Whether it's Daryl Cullinan stories, which are pretty famous and that type of thing. But that was part of the battle. And I've always said, look, it was pure theatre when he was there. At the end of his run up, or walk up, I should say, not really a run up, but his 4-pace walk up to the stumps. The way he'd flick the ball up in his hands at the end of the mark, he might move a fielder literally 5 centimetres and then move him back 5 centimetres, and where he originally, it was all part of his act. But where he had it over most people, he could then back it up in how he's going to deliver that ball. His control, his accuracy, his know-how was second to none, and that's why he's been a great at the game.
A 2-part one from me is my last one. I guess one on Warne and then one general one on Shane. I mean, obviously you were a star, so you had a few weapons up your sleeve. But if someone came to you now who was a new cricketer and said, "Oh, Alec, what was it? If you could describe to me what it was like to actually face Shane Warne, what was it about? What were you trying to watch? How were you trying to do it?" I guess that's the first part of the question. And the second one is, we spoke about 98, 99. Have you spoken to Arjuna Ranatunga since? Because that's one of my favourite moments, that little exchange behind the stumps at the Adelaide Oval.
Well, we'll deal with the first one first. So Warne, he was tough, So I've read, I've come to think 14 times, but he had mystery. You could pick, his Roman actually was easier to pick than, say, Mushtaqs of Pakistan. But because he drifted the ball so much, he would drift it because the amount of spin he put on, he'd get a lot of in-drift and then spin it big. And that flipper until his shoulder was, I struggle to pick it, which if you watch any highlights, I prove that I definitely struggle to pick it. But he bowled very few bad balls. That was the thing. So as a batter, you want to impose yourself on the opposition and put the attack back onto the bowler. But his accuracy was second to none. Murali obviously has ended up with more wickets, but Shane Warne, is a better bowler. Murali may have more wickets, but Warne mastered the hardest art in leg spin. And if I had my time again, I'd look to attack him more. Whereas I probably, or as an English group, we went into our shells too much, try to survive against him, instead of trying to put him on the back foot by, as I say, looking to get after him, which is what England did in 2005. And that proved successful, Kevin Peterson and others. But we probably didn't have the confidence, or as a group, we weren't confident enough to play a slightly higher risk form of cricket against Warne. And that was our fault. So we take responsibility for that, while still saying, Warne had the better of us, sadly. And as for Ranatunga, since I packed in, I've spoken to him and we get on well. But he was the only bloke who got under my skin when I played against him. And what happened in Adelaide, that was it was good, and we had some other times as well where perhaps the stump mics weren't on. But it was and I meant it. I was going to call him something else, but I thought, no, I can't actually use that word. So it ended up being country captain, I think. But so take your pick what I may have been saying to him. But and again, credit him, because he was only, I had no problems with words on the field, but it was the way he went about things. I felt was wrong, but he was also doing it right by Sri Lanka. But he wasn't on my Christmas card list. But since we've packed in, he is now, and he's a decent bloke, by the way. Now he's packed in, but at the time, I wouldn't have mind. I'd have run him over and probably reversed back over him as well if I had the opportunity.
Now, in Darren's intro, he mentioned the MCG incident with Bay 13 going crazy in that. And I could actually, I was there that night. I was sitting just up above to
golf balls on. I'm sure I've seen you before.
I was sitting up just above Bay 13, down probably about 2 bays, I reckon. And we were sitting above it, sort of going, yeah, this is ridiculous. What did
in an exec box on a freebie, were you?
No. What did you actually say to him? And he sort of had a look on his face of, what do you want me to do? What did he say?
But no, my thing, the last thing you want is a game to be cancelled or abandoned because of cricket behaviour. You know, we had it once here against Pakistan when their fans just kept running on the field, and it wasn't safe for our players, and that got abandoned. Whereas this time, listen, I love playing in Australia, and I love playing at Sydney, and love playing at the MCG, and it was quite a full house, but not far off it. And it got rowdy, which is fine. But when beer bottles or the stubbies came on and then golf balls started coming on, you have to do thing of player safety and to make a point. So we brought everyone within the 30-metre circle just to get away from, I forget, it might be Mark Elam, I think, down there, or Alan Mullally down at fine leg, third man. And the police weren't stopping it. So I thought, well, there's only one bloke probably in Australia, but certainly in Melbourne, it was the king himself. So I thought, right, come on, Warne, you're not just a fine bowler, but now I'm going to show, let's just see how good you really are. So signalled that leg spin, bring him out. And he said, what do you want? I said, down to you. Only people, they love you. And it was potluck. You know, he went down, he put the helmet on, did a bit of
a good touch,
armour and whatever else. We went down there. I just kept quiet, knowing that I wouldn't get hit with anything. If I'm stood close to Warne, they're not throwing anything at me in case their accuracy is not great and it hits the king. He literally just went, settle down, boys or girls, just settle down. They did, and they started chanting Warne, and then the rest is history. We carried on.
Well, Alec, as I always said, you're my favourite non-Australian combatant over the journey. I love the way you went about it, like the likes of yourself and Darren Gough in particular from that era. So thanks for sharing those stories. And you're a wonderful part of a lot of those key moments as well. And a pleasure to get the chance to speak to you again.
No, nice to speak with us. Saying pretty sad, very sad circumstances. But no, as I said at the start, there, not just Australia, but the cricketing world has lost, one of the all-time greats. And say condolences to the family and friends and everyone that knew him.